Benedict Arnold, once a celebrated American general during the Revolutionary War, became a name synonymous with betrayal. Between 1775 and 1780, in the midst of fierce conflict across the American colonies, Arnold's actions would shake the foundation of a nation in the making. Born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1741, Arnold's early life was marked by both ambition and loss. His father's descent into alcoholism and bankruptcy forced young Benedict to carve his path, first as an apothecary, then as a merchant. But war awakened something deeper in him, a thirst for glory, and eventually, resentment. At the war's onset, Arnold distinguished himself in bold campaigns, including the capture of Fort Ticonderoga and the grueling march to Quebec. But behind the accolades, frustration brewed. Passed over for promotions, smeared by rivals, and accused of corruption while serving as military governor of Philadelphia, Arnold felt bitter and disrespected by the Continental Congress. In 1779, he began secretly corresponding with the British, ultimately agreeing to surrender the strategic fort at West Point in exchange for money and a position in the British Army. Arnold's method was stealth and manipulation. He used his command to weaken defenses at West Point, setting the stage for a quiet handover. But the plot unraveled when his contact, Major John Andre, was captured by American forces in September 1780 with incriminating documents hidden in his boot. As news of the betrayal spread, Arnold narrowly escaped aboard a British ship. Andre, however, was hanged as a spy. There was no trial for Arnold. He was granted a commission in the British Army and lived out the rest of his days in exile, dying in London in 1801. Reviled in the United States, his name became a permanent byword for treason. Though never captured or tried by American authorities, Benedict Arnold's betrayal left a scar on the revolutionary cause, one that still echoes through history. Aldrich Ames. The name still stirs unease inside American intelligence circles. Between 1985 and 1994, Ames, once a trusted CIA counterintelligence officer stationed in Langley, Virginia, secretly handed over some of the most sensitive U.S. secrets to the Soviet Union and later Russia. His betrayal wasn't just about espionage, it was about bodies. At least 10 CIA assets were executed because of what he disclosed. Born in 1941, Ames was raised in a family steeped in intelligence. His father was a CIA analyst. But despite this pedigree, Ames's early career was unremarkable. He struggled with alcohol and debt, living well beyond his means. By the early 1980s, financial desperation met opportunity. In 1985, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., offering classified information in exchange for cash. The Soviets didn't hesitate. Over the next 9 years, Ames sold out nearly every major CIA operation against the USSR. He typed out names of double agents, revealed ongoing missions, and even compromised his own colleagues. His method was brazen. He met handlers in public places, used dead drops, and communicated via covert signals. All while depositing large sums of money and upgrading his lifestyle, he bought a $540,000 home in cash. And yet for years, no one questioned it. But by the early 90s, the agency knew something was wrong. A wave of compromised operations pointed to a mole. In 1993, a CIA-led task force zeroed in on Ames. Surveillance was tight. They watched his movements, tracked his bank deposits, and scrutinized his communications. The turning point came when investigators matched a spike in Ames's finances with specific leaks to the Soviets. The noose tightened. On February 21, 1994, Aldrich Ames and his wife Rosario were arrested just blocks from their home. The evidence was overwhelming. In court, Ames confessed, admitting he had betrayed his country for nearly a decade. In exchange for cooperation, Rosario received a lighter sentence. But Ames? He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ames's case remains one of the most damaging intelligence breaches in American history. Not only did it cost lives, but it also shattered trust at the heart of the CIA. Robert Hansen. He was an FBI agent, a devout Catholic, and one of the most damaging spies in American history. From 1979 to 2001, Hansen operated in the shadows of Washington, D.C., selling state secrets to the Soviet Union, and later Russia, for over 2 decades. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses and reserved demeanor was a man quietly betraying his country from within the very institution tasked with protecting it. Born in 1944 in Chicago, Hansen was raised under a strict disciplinarian father, who, by some accounts, emotionally abused him. He studied chemistry, then accounting, and eventually joined the FBI in 1976. Cold, brilliant, and socially awkward, Hansen longed for significance and power. Some believe his turn to espionage was fueled by a mix of resentment, narcissism, and a desire to outsmart a system he quietly disdained. Hansen's espionage was meticulous. He used coded messages, dead drops in Virginia parks, and alias names like Ramon Garcia to transmit top-secret material. Nuclear war strategies, surveillance techniques, even the identities of double agents, many of whom were executed as a result. In return, he was paid over $1.4 million in cash and diamonds. He never met his Russian handlers face-to-face, insisting on anonymity and using advanced counter-surveillance tactics, including encrypted letters and remote dead-drop signals. But by the late 1990s, a pattern emerged. The FBI, desperate to find the mole-devastating U.S. intelligence, launched a deep internal probe. The break came when U.S. operatives obtained a file from Russian intelligence containing Hansen's fingerprints and a voice recording. Cross-matching that evidence with internal FBI logs led to one man. On February 18, 2001, Hansen was caught red-handed placing classified materials under a footbridge in a Virginia park, his final dead drop. He pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy in a deal to avoid the death penalty. In 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hansen spent the rest of his days in solitary confinement at the Supermax in Colorado, dying in 2023. His betrayal remains one of the most catastrophic intelligence breaches in U.S. history. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They were an American couple at the heart of one of the most explosive espionage cases of the Cold War. Between 1945 and 1950 in New York City, they were accused of passing top-secret atomic information to the Soviet Union, an act that, in the early years of nuclear tension, was seen by many as outright treason. Julius, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, grew up in Manhattan's Lower East Side, a neighborhood brimming with political idealism and working-class struggle. He joined the Young Communist League while studying electrical engineering, eventually working as an engineer for the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Ethel, raised in a similarly modest environment, had aspirations in singing, but found herself drawn to leftist activism through her work as a labor organizer. Their shared ideology and deep disillusionment with fascism and capitalist inequality bonded them tightly. But it was the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that reportedly radicalized Julius further, triggering his resolve to even the global power balance by any means necessary. Between 1944 and 1950, Julius was alleged to have led a Soviet spy ring that funneled atomic secrets from U.S. labs to Soviet agents. He recruited friends, co-workers, even Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, a machinist at Los Alamos, to share classified material. Ethel, though not directly involved in the science, was accused of typing notes and encouraging the operation. The information they passed helped the Soviets accelerate the development of their own atomic bomb, effectively ending America's monopoly on nuclear power. The unraveling began in 1950, when Klaus Fuchs, a British scientist, confessed to leaking secrets to the Soviets. His confession led to Greenglass, who, in turn, implicated his own sister and brother-in-law. Julius was arrested in July 1950. Ethel followed weeks later. With rising Cold War paranoia and pressure from the FBI, prosecutors sought to make an example out of the couple. Their 1951 trial was swift and incendiary. The evidence was largely circumstantial, relying heavily on testimony from Greenglass, who later admitted to lying about key details. But the political climate was unforgiving. The jury found both guilty of conspiracy to commit espionage, and Judge Irving Kaufman sentenced them to death. Appeals were denied, clemency rejected. Even President Eisenhower stood firm. On June 19, 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed at Sing Sing prison, becoming the first American civilians put to death for espionage. John Anthony Walker Jr. He was a U.S. Navy chief warrant officer who orchestrated one of the most damaging espionage operations in American history. Active from 1967 until his arrest in 1985, Walker's betrayal spanned nearly 2 decades and helped the Soviet Union decipher American naval operations during the height of the Cold War. Based out of Norfolk, Virginia, he used his trusted military position to leak classified information directly into the hands of the enemy. Born in 1937 in Washington, D.C., Walker was raised in a turbulent home and turned to the military as a way out of financial instability. Though outwardly disciplined, he was driven by greed and disillusionment. After experiencing financial trouble in the mid-1960s, he saw an opportunity not in loyalty, but in treachery. By the late 60s, he had walked into the Soviet embassy and offered his services for cash. Walker's operation was alarmingly effective. With access to top-secret naval codes and communications, he provided the Soviets with cipher keys, ship movement schedules, and strategic blueprints. He recruited a spy ring that included his son, Michael Walker, his brother Arthur, a retired Navy officer, and a friend, Jerry Whitworth. Together, they supplied the KGB with thousands of documents that compromised American submarine tracking and wartime readiness. What brought him down wasn't a CIA sting or intercepted message. It was a phone call. In 1985, Walker's ex-wife, Barbara, disturbed by his manipulation of their son and haunted by years of silence, tipped off the FBI. That tip triggered a fast-moving investigation. Surveillance, wiretaps, and a planted tracking device led to Walker's arrest as he attempted to drop off a bundle of classified material at a dead-drop site near Washington, D.C. In court, Walker pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty for his son, who was sentenced separately. He was convicted of espionage and received a life sentence. Prosecutors described the damage as immeasurable. Walker spent the rest of his life in federal prison and died in 2014. Edward Snowden. In 2013, a name erupted across headlines and divided the world: Edward Snowden. A former contractor for the U.S. National Security Agency, Snowden operated out of Hawaii when he triggered one of the most explosive intelligence leaks in modern history. At just 29, he exposed a secretive surveillance apparatus that reached far beyond what most Americans had imagined, thrusting questions of privacy, security, and government overreach into the global spotlight. Raised in North Carolina and Maryland, Snowden came from a family steeped in public service. His father in the Coast Guard, his mother a federal court clerk. A high school dropout who later earned his GED, he was drawn to computers and hacking, teaching himself advanced programming. After brief Army training and stints with the CIA and Dell, Snowden eventually contracted with Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting firm working for the NSA. But beneath the surface, he was disillusioned, haunted by what he described as unconstitutional government behavior. That disillusionment became his trigger. In May 2013, Snowden boarded a flight to Hong Kong, carrying tens of thousands of classified NSA documents on a thumb drive. His method was surgical. He used privileged access to siphon vast archives of data on global surveillance programs like PRISM and X-Keyscore. Within weeks, journalists Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras began publishing bombshell revelations, showing how the NSA collected data on millions of Americans and foreign allies alike, without their knowledge or consent. The U.S. government launched a manhunt, charging Snowden under the Espionage Act. But before they could catch him, he vanished again, this time landing in Moscow with the help of WikiLeaks. For weeks, he was stranded in a Russian airport, stateless and pursued, until the Kremlin granted him asylum. He remains in Russia to this day, a fugitive to some, a whistleblower to others. No trial ever came. Facing charges that carry up to 30 years in prison, Snowden declined to return without assurances of a fair defense. In 2020, he was granted permanent residency in Russia, and in 2022, Russian citizenship. His fate remains unresolved as the world continues to debate whether he betrayed his country or tried to save it. Jonathan Pollard. The name still divides opinions. In the early 1980s, deep inside the corridors of American intelligence, A Navy analyst stationed in Washington, D.C., would orchestrate one of the most controversial spy cases in U.S. history. From 1984 to 1985, Pollard secretly funneled classified information to Israel, an American ally. But his betrayal raised profound questions about loyalty, national security, and the murky boundaries of allegiance. Born in 1954 in Galveston, Texas, Pollard was raised in a strongly pro-Israel household. His father, a microbiologist, instilled in him a sense of intellectual ambition. But Jonathan's academic brilliance was shadowed by emotional instability and a tendency toward exaggeration. After joining the U.S. Navy as a civilian intelligence analyst, he gained access to sensitive satellite, signal, and human intelligence reports, highly classified assessments of Arab military capabilities. Pollard later claimed he passed this information not for profit, but to aid Israel's defense. Yet that justification couldn't mask the sheer volume. Tens of thousands of pages leaked over 18 months. Pollard's method was brazen. He photocopied classified documents during work hours, smuggled them out in briefcases, and handed them off to Israeli handlers. In return, he received cash, jewelry, and promises of refuge, though he insisted his motivation was ideological. The scope of the breach alarmed officials. It was the largest known compromise of U.S. secrets to an ally at the time. Suspicion first arose when colleagues noticed Pollard accessing files unrelated to his assignments. A tightening circle of internal surveillance followed. In November 1985, fearing imminent arrest, Pollard and his wife Anne made a desperate dash to the Israeli embassy, only to be denied sanctuary. Moments later, FBI agents closed in. He was arrested on the spot. In 1987, Pollard pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit espionage. Despite the deal, the judge handed him a life sentence, citing the magnitude of the damage. His wife received 5 years. For decades, the case stirred diplomatic friction between the U.S. and Israel. Supporters saw Pollard as a scapegoat. Critics called him a traitor. After serving 30 years, he was released in 2015, still a figure of debate in the shadowy world of espionage. Harold James Nicholson. He was a high-ranking CIA officer who became the highest-ranking official ever convicted of espionage for spying against the United States. Active from the mid-1990s and arrested in 1996 at Washington Dulles International Airport, Nicholson operated primarily from CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and overseas in countries like Malaysia and Austria. His betrayal cut deep into the heart of American intelligence during a volatile post-Cold War period. Born in 1950, Nicholson grew up in Oregon and entered military service before joining the CIA in the late 1970s. He was known as intelligent, charismatic, and ambitious. But behind that polished surface lay mounting financial pressures, divorce, debt, and a thirst for validation. These strains would eventually drive him toward treason. He was stationed in sensitive overseas posts, including Moscow, where he had access to some of the CIA's most guarded secrets. From 1994 to 1996, Nicholson secretly sold classified information to Russian intelligence officials. He provided the names of CIA trainees, internal memos, and details about U.S. operations, material that placed lives at risk. He avoided detection by using tradecraft techniques he had once taught himself, avoiding surveillance, using coded language, and meeting Russian handlers in neutral territories. In exchange, he received over $300,000. But even the most seasoned spy slips. A routine polygraph in 1996 flagged inconsistencies. That triggered quiet surveillance, and soon, the FBI discovered Nicholson was taking frequent trips abroad under vague pretenses, carrying materials beyond his clearance. The final break came when agents caught him heading to Switzerland with classified documents hidden in his briefcase. He was arrested on the spot. In 1997, Nicholson pleaded guilty to espionage and was sentenced to 23 years in prison. But shockingly, from behind bars, he resumed contact with Russian agents, this time using his son as a courier. In 2011, after a second arrest, Nicholson was sentenced to another 8 years. His case remains one of the most damaging double betrayals in CIA history. a man entrusted with secrets who chose to sell them twice. Richard W. Miller, he was once a trusted counterintelligence agent within the FBI. In the early 1980s, stationed in Los Angeles, Miller held the unenviable distinction of becoming the first FBI agent ever indicted for espionage. His betrayal wasn't just a matter of leaked secrets. It was tangled in seduction, desperation, and Cold War paranoia. Born in 1937 in Idaho, Miller appeared to follow a conventional path. A Mormon, a father of 8, and fluent in Russian, he was hired by the FBI in 1964. But beneath the professional exterior lay a man burdened by debt, career stagnation, and a growing sense of irrelevance. These cracks widened when he met a captivating Soviet émigré named Svetlana Ogorodnikova. She wasn't just charming, she was a KGB asset. Miller's descent began with small gestures, confidential insights, brief meetings, but soon he handed over classified documents to Ogorodnikova, some of which identified Soviet defectors and double agents. In return, he hoped for cash and, more dangerously, a romantic relationship with her. His methods were brazen, using FBI copy machines to duplicate documents and meeting Svetlana in broad daylight. The unraveling came in 1984, when fellow agents grew suspicious of his erratic behavior and associations. A surveillance operation caught him red-handed. He was arrested before a planned rendezvous, holding a package stuffed with government secrets and promises of more to come. At trial, Miller claimed he was working undercover, trying to infiltrate Soviet spy circles on his own initiative. The jury didn't buy it. After a mistrial and retrial, he was convicted in 1990 of espionage and bribery. The sentence, 20 years in federal prison. His case stunned the Bureau, revealing vulnerabilities at the heart of America's top domestic intelligence agency. Richard W. Miller's fall wasn't just about espionage, it was about ego, naivete, and the cost of trusting the wrong person. Earl Edwin Pitts. He was a former FBI special agent who, between 1987 and 1992, secretly betrayed the United States by spying for the Soviet Union and later Russia, while based in New York and Washington, D.C. His arrest in 1996 sent shockwaves through the intelligence community, reigniting fears that Cold War loyalties hadn't fully died. Born in Illinois and raised with Midwestern values, Pitts served in the U.S. Army before joining the FBI in 1983. By all appearances, he was a loyal agent. But beneath the surface, Pitts harbored growing resentment. He believed the FBI mistreated him, passed him over for promotion, and undervalued his service. That bitterness festered until it became the fuel for treason. Pitts made his first contact with Soviet intelligence in 1987. Carefully calculated, he approached the KGB himself, offering secrets in exchange for cash. Over the years, he passed classified information, including the identities of American operatives and surveillance operations. He used dead drops, anonymous mailings, and cash pickups, classic spycraft straight from a Cold War playbook. In return, he received more than $224,000 and felt justified with every betrayal. The turning point came years later when a former KGB officer defected and exposed Pitts' codename. In response, the FBI launched a covert sting operation. An undercover agent posing as a Russian intelligence officer made contact, offering Pitts a chance to resume his espionage activities. Pitts agreed, unaware he was walking into a trap. After months of recorded meetings and evidence collection, he was arrested in December 1996. In court, Pitts pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and attempted espionage. He admitted his actions with little emotion, blaming his disillusionment with the FBI. In 1997, he was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison. Adam Gadon, born in 1978 in Oregon, raised on a goat farm in Southern California. By all outward appearances, he was an intelligent, quiet boy. But beneath the surface, a radical transformation was brewing, one that would take him from the American heartland to the heart of Al-Qaeda's propaganda machine. Gadon grew up homeschooled, isolated, and intensely introspective. His father, a former rock musician turned self-styled naturalist, raised him in a non-traditional, anti-establishment environment. As a teenager, Gadon converted to Islam and became involved with a local mosque in Orange County. But it wasn't just faith that drew him in. It was extremism. Online forums and radical preachers deepened his alienation, and by the late 1990s, he had vanished, resurfacing years later in Pakistan under a new identity as Azam the American. From there, Gadon's voice became a weapon. Fluent in English and steeped in Western culture, he became Al-Qaeda's media strategist, writing speeches for Osama bin Laden and appearing in videos calling for attacks on the West. He wasn't just a translator, he was a bridge between jihadist ideology and the Western world. His knowledge of American vulnerabilities made his propaganda uniquely dangerous. By 2004, intelligence agencies had confirmed his identity. The FBI added him to their most wanted terrorists list in 2006, offering $1 million for information leading to his capture. But Gadon remained elusive, protected in Pakistan's tribal regions. Despite attempts to track his communications, he stayed ahead of drone surveillance, frequently relocating and hiding behind aliases. There was never a trial. In January 2015, a U.S. drone strike targeting Al-Qaeda operatives in Waziristan unknowingly killed Gadon. He died without facing justice in a courtroom, a casualty of the very war he helped inflame. His body was never recovered. Ronald William Pelton was a former NSA intelligence analyst who, between 1980 and 1985, sold top-secret information to the Soviet Union. Operating out of Maryland, Pelton's betrayal unfolded during one of the most dangerous stretches of the Cold War. What made his espionage devastating was not just the content he gave up, but how personal desperation cracked open national security. Pelton was born in 1941 in Michigan and raised in poverty. A gifted linguist, he joined the U.S. Air Force and later worked for the National Security Agency. But by the late 1970s, his life unraveled. Deep in debt, unemployed, and facing bankruptcy, Pelton didn't just want a way out, he needed one. In January 1980, instead of finding a second job, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and volunteered his services. With an incredible memory and no physical documents, Pelton used his insider knowledge to relay the details of highly classified NSA operations. Chief among them was Operation Ivy Bells, a top-secret underwater wiretap mission targeting Soviet communications in the Sea of Okhotsk. The Soviets paid him roughly $35,000, pennies compared to the damage he caused. His method was chillingly simple. He relied entirely on verbal briefings, leaving no paper trail. But the silence wouldn't last. In 1985, defector Vitaly Yurchenko, a high-ranking KGB officer, revealed the existence of a former NSA analyst who had walked into the Soviet embassy. The FBI zeroed in on Pelton. Agents arranged a ruse, a seemingly casual interview under the pretense of debriefing former NSA employees. During the encounter, Pelton unwittingly revealed knowledge only the mole could have known. That slip sealed his fate. In 1986, Pelton stood trial in a federal courtroom in Baltimore. The jury found him guilty on 6 counts of espionage-related charges. He was sentenced to 3 life terms plus 10 years. Pelton served over 30 years before being released in 2015. Jerry Chun Xing Li. He was once a trusted CIA officer, stationed across Asia during the height of America's intelligence war with China. But between 2010 and 2012, a catastrophic breach unfolded, one that would gut U.S. spy networks in China and leave more than a dozen informants dead. And at the center of it all stood Li. Born in Hong Kong in 1964 and later naturalized as an American citizen, Li served in the U.S. Army before joining the CIA in 1994. For over a decade, he worked in covert operations, gaining deep access to classified information, including the identities of clandestine assets embedded in the Chinese Communist Party. But after leaving the CIA in 2007 and moving to Hong Kong, his life took a dark turn. Financial hardship, a fractured identity, and resentment reportedly built up until an offer came that would change everything. Chinese intelligence courted him. Li's betrayal was precise and devastating. He methodically passed sensitive details, names, meeting locations, and tradecraft secrets to Chinese handlers. As a result, CIA networks in China collapsed between 2010 and 2012. Informants were arrested, tortured, and executed. The agency was left scrambling, blind in one of its most critical theaters. But suspicion grew. In 2012, during a trip to the US, the FBI covertly searched Li's luggage and found notebooks loaded with classified data, names, phone numbers, meeting spots. Still, it took years of painstaking surveillance and digital forensics to tie him definitively to espionage. In 2018, he was arrested at JFK Airport. It was a stunning takedown. By 2019, Li pleaded guilty to conspiring to deliver national defense information to China. The damage, by then, was irreversible. He was sentenced to 19 years in federal prison. The CIA called it one of the worst intelligence failures in decades, an implosion orchestrated from within. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed the stories, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel to see more interesting videos coming up.